In this video, we'll continue our journey to the northwest on our mission to visit all of the disused stations along the former Chicago Great Western Railroad route, from Chicago to Oelwein, Iowa. This time, we'll travel from our most previous point of departure, Byron, northwest through Ogle County into Stephenson County, Illinois. We'll visit the former depot sites of Myrtle, Egan, and German Valley, as well as artifacts of interest along the way.
The first station past Byron heading west was Myrtle, more than 5 miles to the northwest. To get there, we traveled due west out of Byron, Illinois, along Illinois Route 72, for a little more than 3 miles. We turn right, heading north on Conger Road for 2 miles, until we reach Water Road. We turn left, heading west, driving 2 miles until we reach Pecatonica Road. We then turn right, heading north. As we approach Myrtle, a little more than a half mile up the road, the ridge of trees we see today was the old railroad line, and Myrtle, along with Myrtle Station, was to our left, just by the old railroad crossing.
The Myrtle Station was located on the north side of the trackway, about 270 feet west of Pecatonica Road and 120 feet south of Myrtle Road, in Myrtle, in Leaf River Township, Ogle County, Illinois. The depot structure was of wood frame construction and was approximately 55 feet long by 20 feet wide, utilizing the standard CGW Victorian stick-style design. Myrtle was a flag stop and was one of the original 1887 Chicago Great Western stations. It was first referred to as Melton, but as we'll soon learn, by mid-1889, the station name was changed to Myrtle.
Today, the station site is located on private property, adjacent to backyards of private residences along Myrtle Road. We spoke to the landowner, who was kind enough to give us permission to walk back by the old station site and take photos and videos. There was a single siding to the south of the tracks, extending all the way to Pecatonica Road to the east and a few hundred feet west of the depot. A grain elevator also stood to the south and a short distance west of the station. On the north side of the tracks, a creamery stood to the west of the depot. By the early 1900s, another structure, likely stockyards, had been built a few hundred feet west and south of the sidings. The present owner indicated that the foundations for that structure still exist, although currently below grade.
The community of Myrtle was a railroad town, birthed with the 1887 arrival of the Minnesota and Northwestern Railway, later the Chicago Great Western. The town was platted on the property of William L. Palmer, a local farmer and businessman. Initially, the depot was the entire town, and it took a few years before some of the accessory buildings and structures, such as grain elevators and stockyards, were completed. The new community originally took on the name of Melton. However, when they attempted to obtain a post office in early 1889, the post office administration rejected the name, as it too closely coincided with Milton, Illinois, located to the southwest. Within weeks of this decision, the name of the town and the post office unceremoniously changed to Myrtle, a popular first name in the 1890s, and referring to a type of evergreen shrub.
Myrtle grew quickly in early days, fueled by competition with other local burgs, stimulated by open discussion of moving the station a few miles to the west. The town soon included a few general stores, a creamery, and a grain elevator built by local farmers. The area was known for its good dairy farming, and an 1889 local newspaper boasted that Myrtle is free from all manner of intemperance, gambling, carousing, or female gum chewing.
In subsequent decades, the small railroad town languished, and by the 1930s, Myrtle had lost its post office. The Chicago Great Western suspended passenger service along this stretch in 1956, and freight service a decade later. At some point in the 1960s or 1970s, the depot was removed or demolished. Today, Myrtle lives on as an unincorporated community in Leaf River Township, Ogle County, Illinois, consisting of a clutch of homes along Pecatonica Road.
The next station up the line was Egan, about 3 miles to the west-northwest. To get there, we'll first make a quick left onto Myrtle Road. We'll travel 2.5 miles due west along Myrtle Road until we reach Leaf River Road. We turn right on Leaf River Road heading north and travel a little more than a mile until we reach the small rural community of Egan.
The Egan Depot was located about 190 feet west of Leaf River Road and 530 feet north of Egan Road in Egan in Ogle County, Illinois. The station was situated on the north side of the tracks. Today, a field of soybean crops grows in the place where the Egan Depot once stood.
Egan was a flag stop, known for the first 10 years or so as Egan City, when it had greater ambitions. The Egan City Depot was likely a wooden structure, about 50 by 20 feet in dimension, and also likely used the typical CGW Victorian stick-style design. We say likely as we have no photos of this structure to know for certain. Built along with the depot were grain elevators and stockyards. A U.S. post office was quickly added to the town as well. The station had a single siding to the south of the trackway, extending a few hundred feet to the east of Main Street, which is today Leaf River Road, where stood the grain elevators, which were built by local farmers.
Egan City was not one of the original CGW stations, but was added a few years after the line opened in 1889. Perhaps it was created to fill in the 7-mile span between Myrtle and German Valley. But whatever its origins, this youthful town soon started a rivalry with elder town sister Myrtle, with jibes and insults passing back and forth within the columns of the local newspapers. As with most rivalries, the fighting soon wore out both contestants, until both settled into the routine of a rural railroad village. Egan City did not start appearing in CGW timetables until several years later, perhaps because it saw little use early on.
Passenger and freight service from this depot continued for decades until service ended in 1956. It was not recorded when the depot was finally torn down, but that likely happened in the 1960s or 1970s. Although the station area shows no trace of the former depot, on the east side of Leaf River Road, you can still see a formidable yet dilapidated grain elevator constructed of wood, which may have been original or early at the very least. Nearby the grain elevator, you can also see how Egan Road, which travels east-west, bends northwest, respecting the line of the old railway.
Egan was not always Egan. It first came into being in mid to late 1888 as the Corners, platted on property owned by local farmers and businessmen Noah Speaker and Oliver Carpenter. Its sole reason for being was to serve the new railroad line, the Chicago, St. Paul, and Kansas City Railroad, as the Chicago Great Western was known at that time. In fact, John Myers Egan, who was the general manager of the railway, visited the fledgling town while it was being built, staying in the newly built hotel owned by local landowner Noah Speaker. He was so taken with his hosts that he awarded the naming of the new station in town to Catherine Speaker, Noah's wife. And she, of course, named the town Egan, or Egan City, after their charming guest.
John Myers Egan was born in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1848, of Irish descent. He came to Amboy, Lee County, Illinois, with his parents when he was but 9 years of age. Egan began his railroad career as a boy in the Amboy shops for the Illinois Central Railroad. He rose up the ranks of the railway industry, eventually becoming general manager of the Chicago Great Western in the late 1880s, and then president shortly thereafter. He died a prominent citizen of Lee County in 1923 and was buried in Calvary Cemetery, St. Paul, Ramsey County, Minnesota.
Egan City's bold ambitions bore fruit in the early years. It soon had a lumber yard to the south of the tracks, along with a coal store and hardware store. 2 or 3 more general stores sprung up close by the depot, as well as a grocery and dry goods store. A stock freighting business soon came into operation, as well as a brick factory. The aforementioned Noah Speaker and his wife ran a hotel. A church and school sat to the south of the depot, to the east of Main Street. By the early 1920s, more than a dozen homes clustered around this core business area. 100 years later, Egan, as it eventually came to be known, is a laid-back, unincorporated community in Leaf River Township in Ogle County, Illinois, encompassing perhaps 15 to 20 homes.
Egan is the last of the Ogle County stations westward for the Chicago Great Western. But before we get too far out of Egan, we want to inspect a nearby Chicago Great Western relic, just a short distance past the Egan station, and it's a real gem of an artifact, visible from Leaf River Road. The structure is on private property, and so we will use a drone so as to get a closer look. As is often the case out on the northern Illinois prairie, it's another very windy day, and so we'll stay low to the ground to avoid getting blown off course. In flight, we skim atop the crop rows and quickly sight our target in the distance. We can immediately see that this is a well-built stone structure, about 75 feet wide, with a circular arch passage tunnel about 50 feet long and 10 feet in diameter. The bridge has a bearing from northeast to southwest, with a span of 20 feet or less. Based on its size, this is much less of a bridge and more of a culvert or possibly a cattle pass, although very well built. If you're in the area, this is something worth seeing, whether through binoculars or a zoom lens, as it can be seen from Leaf River Road. However, we don't advise going onto private property without the landowner's permission.
The next stop along the line is German Valley, about 4 miles to the northwest, within Stephenson County, Illinois. To get there, we continue on northward along Leaf River Road for less than a mile until we reach Montague. We turn left, heading due west on Montague for about 3.5 miles. When we reach Rock City Road, we turn right, heading north. We travel 1 mile along this quiet road before reaching the heart of German Valley, where we turn left or west onto German Valley Road. We pass quickly through German Valley until we reach Galena Street and turn left, heading south. The site of the German Valley Station should be close by the end of this street and to the right.
As we pull into the former station site, the ubiquitous grain elevators stand guard, never having left their station once the railroad pulled out 50 years ago. The former depot site is now in the backyard of the last house on Galena Street. We knocked on their door to see whether we could get a closer look, but the owners were not at home, and so we instead took our photos and videos from what we believed to be public property.
Based on 1939 aerial photos, we know that the depot stood about 30 feet south of State Street, which runs to the north of the grain elevators, and about 150 feet west of Galena Street. This depot, unlike many others along this line, stood on the south side of the tracks. Aerial photos from the 1930s tell us that the structure was about 50 feet by 20 feet in dimension. Photographs from the 1950s and 1960s indicate that the depot was of wood frame construction, displaying the typical CGW Victorian stick-style design.
German Valley was one of the original stations of the Minnesota and Northwestern line, started in 1887, and for a brief period in the first few years was known as Weeman. Like Myrtle and Egan, German Valley was a flag stop, the train only stopping when passengers were waiting or for a scheduled freight delivery.
There were 2 sidings to the north of the tracks here, one looping to the north of the elevator complex, with the second looping to the south. The German Valley Station also hosted grain elevators, stockyards, coal sheds, and lumber yards, as well as a creamery at the northeast corner of Church and Rock City Roads, which later became a cheese factory.
A terrible train wreck occurred here in the early morning hours of February 7, 1907, when a westbound express train that was supposed to divert to one of the sidings as it passed plowed into a set of stationary cars alongside the grain elevators. The collision slammed the express train into the grain elevators, destroying them and burying the wreck in a golden deluge of grain. At least 4 people were killed in this accident, and more than 20 were injured.
Unlike Myrtle and Egan, which began their lives as railroad towns in the 1880s, German Valley has a longer legacy, going back to the 1840s and 1850s, when the area was largely settled by, wait for it, Germans, and specifically Germans from East Frisia, the German lowlands which border the northeastern Netherlands. They built a church in the 1850s and soon added a few commercial buildings, such as general stores, to support their fledgling community.
A post office was finally established in the community in 1884 by German emigrant Anko H. Weeman, who also ran a general store. The post office and unincorporated community were then given the eponymous name of Weeman. By 1887, the Minnesota and Northwestern Railway came to town. As they did good business delivering U.S. mail, the new railway drew their route straight through German Valley. Local farmer Gretsch T. Ball, herself an East Frisian by birth, agreed to donate a portion of her land for the new town, with the stipulation that the town be called by her and her late husband's surname, Ball or Balton, which it legally was so platted and named.
However, not all were happy with the name of Balton. Both the U.S. Post Office and the Chicago Great Western felt that it too closely resembled Bolton, which was just a few stations to the west, and hence would be confusing. So the Chicago Great Western station name and post office of the new town became known as German Valley. Local residents did not appear to like the Bayleton town name much either, as the community had been informally referred to as German Valley beforehand. And since Bayleton may also have struck the religiously inclined community as being uncomfortably close to the Old Testament Baal.
Nevertheless, the new town of Ballton was platted, and the German Valley train station within Ballton prospered early on, freighting grain, meat, livestock, and dairy products. When the community finally incorporated in 1907, they appeared to have incorporated as the village of German Valley, although the Ballton name and legal references on plat maps remained. Farmer Bredsti Bagger Ball, meanwhile, passed away in 1908, her husband, Nanki, having died in 1880. Shortly after World War I, German Valley changed its name to Meeken as a result of anti-German sentiment at the time, changing it back to German Valley a few years later, when anti-German sentiment abated.
The depot served the German Valley community for almost 70 years, before passenger service was stopped in 1956, and the station finally was closed in 1968. The demolition of the depot likely followed in the 1970s. Grain elevators still loom largely in the middle of the former Chicago Great Western right-of-way, to the east of Galena Street and the depot site. The small German settlement that started in the 1850s persists more than 170 years on as German Valley, a quiet country village in Ridott Township in Stephenson County, Illinois, with a population now approaching 500 residents.
The next station along this line is South Freeport, more than 5 miles to the northwest. But that will have to wait until our next segment, as we'll close out this chapter of our Chicago Great Western tour in the environs of German Valley, Stephenson County, Illinois. If you are enjoying these videos, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. It truly helps us out and lets us know that these videos are important to our viewers. In the next episode of this journey, we'll continue onwards across northwest Stephenson County, Illinois, visiting the disused stations of South Freeport, Bolton, and Pearl City. We'll see you then.